The Opel Ascona A was Opel's new large family car launched in late 1970 as a saloon, also known as the limousine, being either a two or a four-door, with a three-door estate branded as the Voyage and later the Caravan. It sat between the smaller Kadett and the larger Record in Opel's lineup and shared its platform and running gear with the Manta A Coupe introduced 2 months earlier. The Ascona has an unusual story as Opel planned it as the successor to the Kadett and only decided during development to create a completely new model series. The Kadett B, which was in production at the time, remained in the program and was not replaced until 1973, and the reason for this was the competition. When the Opel saw the positive response from the public after the release of the Ford Capri and envisioned a sedan with the same chassis, they decided in the spring of 1969 to counter it with a new vehicle size. All Ascona A models used a conventional front-engine rear-wheel drive layout with a 4-speed manual gearbox or a 3-speed automatic, which was optional. The limousine had a length of 4 meters and 18 centimeters, making it a bit bigger than the Kadett. And the Voyage, or the Estate, used the same basic package but with a squared-off rear and split folding load area. Opel basically marketed it as a leisure wagon rather than a pure load lugger, which was unusual for the time. Although Opel had hoped for more from the Voyage, producing a total of just 50,750 units, the company attempted quite successfully to increase the station wagon body, sharing by offering it as a standard trim level starting in March 1974, 4 years after the introduction, under the Opel name Caravan, which was basically typical for Opel, as the Ascona was now called the Ascona Caravan, along with the Kadett Caravan and the Record Caravan, which was an ideal for cargo transport rather than a recreational vehicle. And the styling of the car was crisp and uncluttered, basically a simple, slightly Coke bottle body with somewhat square headlights, but basically being a square box that they were in, as the red headlights themselves were round. There also were slim pillars for good visibility and a neat horizontal grille graphic, somewhat looking like a Chevy Nova. On the inside, the Ascona A emphasized clarity and durability. Standard cars had an easy-to-read instrument pod with a speedometer and essential gauges, a sensible switchgear, and a robust trim. The SR package, for example, added a small diameter sport steering wheel, a tachometer, wood veneer on the dashboard, and a neat auxiliary gauge console under the radio. Seats were firm and upright, and the tall glass house made the cabin feel by early 1970 standards. Opel used its proven inline-4 family. The 1.2 liter was an overhead valve unit, and the 1.6 and 9 liter were Opel's cam-in-head designs. Basically, the 1.2 liter was the smallest engine, but was available the latest from 1972 to 1975, as before that period you had the 1.6 and the 1.9 liter engines only available. Between 1972 to 1975, as said before, you had the 1.2S with super petrol producing 60 horsepower and around 88 newton meters of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of about 19 seconds. The top speed was around 137 kilometers an hour, and the typical fuel consumption was about 8.5 liters per 100 kilometers. This engine definitely wasn't fast, but it was just the base model engine that Opel offered the Ascona with. Also somewhat being introduced after the fuel crisis of the late 1970s. Besides the 1.2N, the at that point least powerful engine was the 1.6N, which was a normal petrol engine, basically being the base 1.6 and also being offered as the base 1.6, as it didn't have that much more power, rated at 68 horsepower and around 108 newton meters of torque, doing 0 to 100 not that much quicker in 18 seconds, with the top speed also not that much higher of 145 kilometers an hour, and an average fuel consumption higher than the 1.2S at 9 liters per 100 kilometers. Opel eventually, with a lot of other engines, later in 1975 decreased the power output, to which a few months later they actually increased the power output back again. Basically for somewhat the environmental cause of the cars. Because later in 1975 the power was decreased to 60 horsepower and 102 newton meters, worsening the time yet again to this time 19 seconds, being comparable to the 1.2S and a top speed of 140 kilometers an hour. Besides this engine, you also had a more powerful 1.6S with super petrol, being available also between the whole car's production period of 1970 to 1975. And this had 80 horsepower, but in 1975 later had 75 horsepower and had torque of around 180 newton meters at the beginning, while later this was only 112. 0 to 100 with this engine was around 14.5 to 17 seconds, and actually the top speed was estimated to be between 150 to 155 kilometers an hour, basically depending on either being an automatic or being a later version with only 75 horsepower, while the earlier models with 80 horsepower and a manual had a top speed of around 155 kilometers an hour. Fuel consumption actually was much higher than with the 1.6N and the 1.2S, as this was between 9.2 to 10.6 liters per 100 kilometers. And basically the 1.6 engine was available in either the L or the Luxus, and also the more sportier SR packages. You also had the top of the line being the 1.9. This also was available the whole production period of 1970 to 1975. And this had 90 horsepower, while later having less power of around 80 horsepower. And had around 148 newton meters at the beginning to 142 newton meters later in 1975, with a 0 to 100 time of around 13 to 15.5 seconds. The top speed also was higher than with the other engines, but not that much higher than the 1.6S in my opinion, as this was 155 to 160. Fuel consumption wise, it wasn't actually that much worse than the 1.6S, with the average fuel consumption being between 9.7 to 10.9 liters per 100 kilometers. And yeah, this basically also was offered in the SR, some luxury models, but basically the bigger engines always were offered in the same models. Talking about the SR, as said before, from March 1971 Opel offered the standard Luxus, but also the sportier SR equipment package, available with, as said before, the 1.6S or the 1.9S. And the SR brought stiffer springs with matched dampers, a twin body side stripes, a chrome tailpipe, steel sports wheels, a smaller sport steering wheel, a tachometer, a wood dash trim, and the auxiliary gauge console. The SR was the only Ascona with a tach and built-in timer, and basically besides the SR, several special editions were sold in the early 1970s, as basically during the whole production period Opel produced many special editions. For example, earlier in 1952 you had the Holiday based on the 1.6S Luxus, which basically added a heated rear window, uprated alternator, halogen fog lights, plus a fog rear lamp, and some basically wider radial tires with sports wheels. But later Opel still produced these special versions, as in 1975 you had the Summer Bazaar, which was a budget-oriented model, basically with a 1.2 engine most of the time, and this was offered in bright colors with sports wheels and optional stripes and mirrors. And you also had the Ascona 19. Basically this was somewhat comparable to the 1.9S SR, for example. But the 1.9S was actually introduced in 1971, featuring the same 1.9 liter engine from the record C, if I'm correct, which had been available from the Manta from the start, and which could also have combined with the Opel automatic transmission. Opel therefore wanted to align themselves with the BMW O2 series, however this plan sadly did not meet expectations because the larger displacements BMWs had was the most popular model, as the Ascona 19 was the least popular of the two. For the USA, basically also with the Manta, if you haven't seen that video already, the Ascona was manufactured from 1970 September at the GM plant in Antwerp and sold as the Opel 1900 via Buick dealerships. Initially, all three variants were produced, with the four-door being discontinued in January 1973 and the Voyage being offered under the designation 1900 wagon. It was powered by a 1.9-liter engine with a compression ratio of 7.6 to 1 and 78 horsepower, although in 1974 a 1.9 injection was introduced with 84 to 102 horsepower. Basically, this engine was more powerful because the 1.9 injection was introduced to meet fuel and also environmental standards at the time in the USA. Eventually in 1975 in July the exports ended with 82,301 units and the remaining stocks were sold as Opel Specials. So basically this was actually quite successful in the USA. Just like with the Opel Manta A also being sold. The main competitors at the time included the Ford Taunus or the Cortina or the Capri for the Manta and the Volkswagen Passat, but also some French competition like the Peugeot 304 or 305 and the Fiat 131. As a model, the Ascona A effectively replaced the Opel Olympia A, which basically was a luxurious Kadett. And besides this Opel Olympia A, some upper Kadett B trims also got succeeded by the Opel Ascona that were retired in 1970. Its eventual successor was the Opel Ascona B, introduced in 1975, but this generation sadly did not have a station wagon. This Opel Ascona B later also was sold as the Vauxhall Cavalier, and on July 9th, 1975, production ended in favor of the Ascona B, which was talked about before, which was presented alongside the Manta B in 1975 at the Frankfurt Motor Show. It ended the production with 691,438 cars rolling off the production line in Bochum and Antwerp, and almost 181,000 of those were powered by the later introduced 1.2-liter S engine. Thanks for watching this video. In order to be able to upload more videos in the future, please consider becoming a member of my channel or sending a super thanks on this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Don't forget to check out this playlist with many interesting videos with various parts of the automotive industry, and I will see you in the next video.